Welcome to Car Sales Talk 101, where it's all about life in the car business. Telling you like it is. Here's the man with the plan, Terry Cameron. Let's get started.
Welcome back to Car Sales Talk 101. I'm Terry Cameron. I believe this is episode number 110 and should be airing the end of April, beginning of May, my favorite time of the year. Weather is perfect for mountain bike riding. Hopefully all the storms are gone and the trails are dry, because that's what I do in my free time, of course, when I'm not working or talking to you guys. Before we get started with this week's episode of my 4 rules to handling objections, I want to remind you to hop on over to Apple Podcast, write me a review, give me a rating, and if possible, shoot me an email at 10minutessalestalk@hot.rr.com. Ask me anything, and I'll tell you the truth. So, let's go ahead and get started. Again, this week we're talking about my 4 rules to handling objections. The very first rule is an important rule, and that's don't panic. Whenever an objection comes up, just don't panic. Too many times I see salespeople jump through hoops to meet a customer's demand when they throw an objection at them, even though the customer does not really expect to get everything they ask for, and quite often they're really not objecting to anything in particular. Remember, most objections are reflex objections anyway. They're just conditioned responses. So don't panic. The sales process is there to help you through the bumps and grinds that might arise while following the road to the sale. Believe me, the customer sees blood when you start to stutter and sweat. Remember back in the day when your mama said, don't let them know they're getting to you, because when they can see you squirm, they just keep on squeezing. So if you haven't figured it out yet, it's all about confidence. Confidence in you, confidence in your product, and confidence in your knowledge. Do not panic. Rule number 2, don't cause the objection. What do I mean by that? Well, just because the customer asks a question or makes a negative comment, it doesn't mean he or she is objecting to something. For example, the customer says, wow, this car is expensive. Or, I was hoping to get more for my trade-in. That's just them making a general statement, not objecting to the price or the trade value. Where we make a mistake is when we respond to them as if it were an objection and something we have to address before they can purchase, such as, what payment were you thinking about? Or, how much did you want for your trade? And you end up with the entire process hinging on reaching a dollar amount that was never a deal breaker, or at least it wasn't at the time it was originally brought up. I remember when I sold cars, and sometimes now when I TO a customer, when they say, whoa, that sure is a high payment, my response would be words to the effect of, yes it is, and I'd justify that number at the time depending on my title. In other words, if I were addressing it as a manager, I could tell them the reason the payment is so high could be maybe their credit or the negative equity they have going into the deal. Or as a salesperson, I would just say, hey, I understand. It is a high payment. And if you'd like, I could have my business manager explain why. But really, the very best method would be to agree and move on quickly. Also, if we did our job all through the process and the customer took mental ownership of the vehicle, remember, we did a really good feature advantage and benefit presentation. We put them in the car. They really fell in love with it and they took total mental ownership of the vehicle. Then these issues never come up, or rarely do they come up. And if they do, it's so much easier bypassing them. And we'll talk more about the method to bypassing objections in a future episode. Let's move on to rule number 3. Don't be the objection. One of the worst things that can happen is when you and the customer just don't jive. Remember, 71% purchase because they liked their salesperson. When that customer drives over the curb onto the lot, it's action. You're on stage, and the audience and critics are the customers. Your job is to please them, and I don't mean to lie to them, or I guess a better way to say it is lead them on, but have faith in the process. Let's face it, by now you should be much better at controlling the process than your customer is. Hopefully you're on stage more than they are in the audience. You're the pro, and you should know that the end result here is a commission check. But if you get booed off the stage, you're out of work. The sun set on the white patent leather shoes and white belt-wearing, slick-talking salesman. And you know what? That's an objection that starts even before the customer walks on our lot or into the showroom. So we have to be on our game. Remember, they don't want to talk to a salesperson. That's the one thing that they are not wanting to do when they're coming in to purchase their car. I remember taking golf lessons years ago, and the one thing that stuck in my head was when the instructor or the golf pro told me to visualize the flight of the ball even before I stepped up and addressed the ball. I recommend doing the same thing when your customer shows up. Visualize the result. Play a movie in your head and visualize the result you want and expect. It keeps you grounded and on pace to the finish line. You do this and watch how many hole-in-ones you hit. Last but not least, rule number 4, isolate the objection. Now, before we get into this rule, I want you to understand that an objection is not necessarily a bad thing. I tell my salespeople that it's one thing to have a customer leave without buying, but shame on us if they leave and we don't know why they didn't buy. Besides, wouldn't it be great if each customer showed up on the lot and told us everything we needed to overcome to have them busting bugs in the car they came in to get? Remember, how hard should it be anyway to sell somebody something they came in to purchase in the first place? And wouldn't it even be better if each of these concerns were realistic? Almost all objections should be addressed and handled at the closing table. As the saying goes, we sell on our feet and we close on our seat. When a real and true objection raises its ugly head, don't put your tail between your legs and make a beeline to the sales desk. Rather, calmly and confidently use these 2 words. Other than. Mr. and Mrs. Customer, other than, and state the objection. In this case, we'll use, other than the payments being just a little bit too high. Is there anything else keeping us from wrapping this up and putting all the shopping behind you and getting you in that car you came here to purchase? What could their response be? Exactly. It could be no, or it could be that plus something else. So the response will only be the only thing we need to overcome to earn their business. And if they do say this or that, we just respond with other than this or that, or other than the payments being just a little bit too high and that not being the right color, or the payment's too high and you think your trade-in is worth a little bit more. Is there anything else keeping you from driving away in your new car? Whether you can overcome the objection or not isn't the point. We need to draw out the real reason that they're not saying yes. And without it, we're shooting in the dark. Now, at this point, you need to be careful. You need to make sure, you need to be careful not to lead the customer to believe that we'll grant every wish. Put doubt in their mind by telling them you really don't think that you're going to be able to do this, but you're going to give it your best shot. And it won't be easy. As a matter of fact, I tell them to wish me luck because I'm going to need it. So that's the 4 most important rules to handle an objection, at least coming from me. Now, there is one last thing you need to know about objections. If it is really a true objection, don't ignore it. And in our future episode, probably the next episode, we're going to talk about how you handle an objection that's really not an objection yet, or not an objection at all. And that's called called bypassing. So again, guys, I really would appreciate it if you hop over to Apple Podcast and write a review and leave me a rating. Remember, the sky's the limit. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please rate it and write a review on Apple Podcast. We appreciate your valuable feedback. You can email Terry at 10minutesalestalk@hot.rr.com. And don't forget to share the show with a friend.